Of course, we are continuing with chapter number 3 entitled Karma Yoga. And we have covered quite a few verses. We are towards the end of the chapter. And in this verse number 32, Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that disobedience will lead to punishment. So just like we have the state laws, the laws of the country, and all those laws are actually there for our benefit. Let's take the traffic laws, when we are driving on the road, those traffic laws are there to protect us, to save us from mishaps. So if we do not follow those state laws or the traffic rules, then obviously we will be the one who will be the loser. So similarly, here in this verse, Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that those who do not follow the laws of the Supreme Lord, they are liable for punishment. Now, someone may say, I do not believe in laws of the Lord. I don't believe in the state laws. Well, here the verse explains that disobedience will lead to no hope for perfection. This human form of life is given to us so that we can somehow or the other understand the purpose of human life and lead it according to the Bhagavad Gita. Let's see what Krishna has to say in verse number 33. Even a man of knowledge acts according to his own nature, for everyone follows the nature he has acquired from the three modes. What can repression accomplish? We've talked about the modes of material nature before also in this chapter. So there are three modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. Well, it's not good enough to be in the mode of goodness. We got to go beyond that. And in chapter 14, we will learn how to transcend these three modes and come to the mode of pure goodness. So in this verse, Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that beings follow nature. Whatever our nature is, that really cannot be changed. And how do we get that nature? By interaction with the modes of material nature. So as I was explaining last week also, it depends on what we eat, it depends on who we associate with. So we acquire those modes and then we start acting under the influence of those three modes. And so when we do that, then that becomes our nature. And Krishna says beings, they follow nature, they follow their own nature. But when one comes to the transcendental platform, which is beyond the three modes of material nature, when we come there, that is when we become free from the three modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. We become free of that because we've gone to the stage of pure goodness. Now, it is difficult to overcome the modes, but Krishna will give us the formula in chapter 14 on how to transcend these three modes. Now, it doesn't matter what our academic accomplishments are. One may be holding a PhD degree, but that person may still be entangled in these three modes until and unless one understands the Bhagavad Gita, and transcends these modes. So academic knowledge cannot help one to transcend these modes. The only way is to follow the instructions given in the Bhagavad Gita. Actually, Bhagavad Gita is considered a science of self-realization, where in a scientific way, we understand who we are, why we are in this material world, why are we suffering, and how to break this cycle of birth and death. So it's a science. And when we take on this knowledge and put it into application, then we go above the three modes of material nature. Let's see verse number 34. There are principles to regulate attachment and aversion pertaining to the senses and their objects. One should not come under the control of such attachment and aversion because they are stumbling blocks on the path of self-realization. Just like in the material world, we get stumbling blocks. Maybe whether it's our career, our relationships, it could be any sphere of life. So there are stumbling blocks. Similarly, even when we are on the path of self-realization, there are stumbling blocks. And Krishna is giving us the formula how to remove those stumbling blocks if one is interested in self-realization. So what do we need to do? We need to regulate the senses. In chapter 2, we understood, how a person gets angry. What is it that causes that person to be angry and to remain angry? So it all starts with the senses coming in contact with sense objects. As soon as that happens, there is attachment. So if I see something really nice, I get attached and I'm like, I want it, I need it, I got to have it. So then there is attachment. And when that desire is not fulfilled, then that leads to anger. So anger is a result of expectations, the senses coming in contact with sense objects. And that is why Krishna is suggesting to Arjuna to control the senses, to regulate the senses. For instance, I can give you an example of how to regulate one sense, and that is, the sense of taste. We all eat every day, probably 3 times or 5 times or 7 times a day. Now, to control the senses, control the tongue, the process is that whatever we eat, we need to offer it to the Supreme Lord Krishna and then partake of that very blessed food. That special spiritual food helps us to regulate our senses. So this is one way we can regulate one of the senses. So if we regulate our attachment and aversion, in other words, we should be in a state where we are samadarshina, which means we are equipoised. It doesn't matter whether it's success, failure, happiness, distress, heat, cold. It could be fame, infamy, anything it could be. But a person remains completely equipoised, not disturbed at all. And that means a person has regulated the senses. So we need to regulate the attachment as well as the aversion. Now, we know from our own experience, we don't like to be controlled. We don't want, the parents or the spouse or the children or the colleagues or friends, anyone to control us. No one likes to be controlled. But we need to understand that we are actually under control. We are already being controlled. We are controlled by our mind, our senses, our attachment to the 3 modes of material nature. So we are all under the control of these different things like the mind, etc. So if we regulate our life, then it'll be possible to control the senses and then control the mind also. Because if we do not control, then senses are going to go haywire. Just like you see in this Bhagavad Gita picture, you see there is a chariot, there are horses, there is a driver, and then there is a passenger. So how do we understand this? Let us consider this body to be like the chariot, and the passenger who's sitting is the spirit soul, which is within our heart. And then the driver is the intelligence. The reins of the horses is the mind, and the horses are like the 5 senses. So for the senses or the horses to be under control, the driver, which is the intelligence, has to control the reins, which is the mind. Only then the passenger, which is the soul, is going to be peaceful on the chariot of this body. This is how we understand. So for intelligence to control the mind, which means the driver to control the reins, the intelligence has to be fed with knowledge. And if there is no knowledge, then there is unrestricted sense enjoyment, and that unrestricted sense enjoyment leads to entanglement. You see, we all have propensities to enjoy. We want to, really have fun and enjoy, but then we need to control that, curb that. Otherwise, they'll become an obstacle on the path of devotional service on spirituality. It'll become an obstacle, a stumbling block. So, of course, we have tried. I'm sure all of you also have tried to enjoy the senses for many, many years, but still we are not satisfied. Why? Because we haven't aimed for higher taste, something higher. Then we will be able to really feel the what you call the peace and the real happiness, which is not temporary, but it is permanent. Let's see verse number 35. It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. Excuse me. So you see here, very clearly Krishna is telling Arjuna, do not do someone else's duty. Perform your own duty. Maybe it's full of faults, but it is better than performing someone else's duty perfectly. So it's not just the duty. We've already learned before that we need to perform prescribed duty. As I previously explained also, that if I am, I'm not feeling well, I have an ailment or a disease, it's not that all medicines will work for all diseases or one medicine works for all diseases. No, there has to be a prescription. The doctor prescribes. Similarly, the Bhagavad Gita, we get the prescription. What is our duty? You see, the material duties, they are as per our psychophysical nature or as per the modes that we have acquired. But as far as spiritual prescribed duties are concerned, we need to get guidance from a bona fide spiritual teacher. And then we need to stick to our own duty and not try to imitate someone else's duty, because according to Krishna, doing that is dangerous. So in any sphere of life, we need guidance. Similarly, in spirituality also, we need guidance. We should not depend on our mind, because the mind can trick us. The mind may say, oh, this is right. And we may think, oh yeah, that is right. And then just go ahead and do it. But possibly it's not right. So guidance is important and not depending on the mind. In fact, Bhagavad Gita gives us a very simple process by which we can control the mind, we can control the senses. And the easiest method given in the Bhagavad Gita is mantra meditation. Meditation helps us to calm our senses, to calm our mind, and it helps us to purify the heart. So mantra meditation is a wonderful process. I personally have been practicing mantra meditation for almost 35 years now, and it has really changed my life. And I feel at peace, and I feel, that yes, there is satisfaction and there is happiness. Let's see verse number 36. Arjuna said, so now this is a question by Arjuna to Krishna. O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Does that sound a bell? Does that sound familiar? Absolutely. Many times people, they do things that they don't want to do. They are like as if they are impelled. They do wrong things as if by force. They don't want to do it, but they do. So Arjuna has asked a very intelligent question, and it is for our benefit. You see, according to the Vedas, we are spirit souls. According to the Bhagavad Gita also, we are spirit souls and we are spiritual in nature. So originally, we are pure, spiritual, free from all contamination. But when we we come into this material world from the spiritual world, and when we are in contact with material world and material nature, then what happens? We start getting contaminated, and people start going the sinful way. They start performing sinful activities, and sometimes it's against our own will, as if we are forced to commit those sinful activities. But we should understand, it is us. It is not the Supreme Lord who's situated in our heart as a super soul who is forcing us to, or impelling us to perform sinful activities. No, it is us. So now let's see what is the answer Krishna is going to give to Arjuna on this wonderful question. Why is it that someone is impelled to perform sinful activities even though unwillingly? Verse number 37, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "It is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world." So much information in this one verse. So the answer to Arjuna's question is, why is someone impelled? Krishna says it is lust only. Now, lust does not just only means attraction towards opposite sex. No, it could be lust for fame, lust for money, lust for power, lust for control. It could be any kind of lust. But here we understand it is the greatest enemy. And how does that come about? In contact with modes of material nature. And what happens if the lust is not controlled? Then it transforms into wrath, which is the sinful enemy. We already heard in the chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita, as I was explaining, that when senses come in contact with sense objects, there is attachment, and when it's unfulfilled, there is anger. Anger leads to bewilderment of memory, that leads to lost intelligence, and also it leads to wrath. And then a person falls down from the spiritual platform. So what has happened, we being the spiritual entities, part of the Supreme Lord, we have, because we have come in the material world and in contact with material modes, our love for the Supreme Lord has turned into lust. And we have noticed that when the lust is unsatisfied, then that leads to illusion, which means we really don't know what is right and what is wrong. And in this verse, Krishna is clearly saying it's the greatest enemy and is born of mode of passion. So we as spirit souls, we have, the what you call the minute independence, very small partial independence we have, to whatever we want to do. But if we misuse, our partial independence in just enjoying the senses, then we'll be baffled. And then there will be no inquiry. We will not inquire, who am I? Why am I suffering? Where did I come from? Did I just drop from somewhere, or where have I come from? And the most important question, where do I go from here? What is my destination? What is my goal? So inquiring is the first step to self-realization. And Bhagavad Gita gradually will teach us how we can change lust into love, back to love. There's a very nice example we can give about how anger leads to wrath, etc. I'm not sure how many of you have heard about the Ramayana, where Lord Ramachandra, Mother Sita, his brother Lakshmana, and then there is Hanuman, the pure devotee of Lord Ramachandra. So what did Hanuman do? When he went to search for Mother Sita in Lanka, in Sri Lanka, when he went there, He, he, of course, we know monkeys have a long tail. Excuse me. So when he was caught by Ravana's soldiers and brought into the assembly of the palace of Ravana, Hanuman was really angry because what Ravana had done to Mother Sita, kidnapped her and, held her hostage, etc., separated her from her husband, Lord Ramachandra. So Hanuman, how did he exhibit his wrath? He burnt Sri Lanka. Even though his tail was put on fire, Ravana thought, if Hanuman's tail is put on fire, he will die. No, he used that, to, devastate Sri Lanka, and that's how he became the greatest devotee of Lord Ramachandra. So we can also use wrath. Of course, we don't have a tail, and of course we cannot put it on fire or do anything, but we can change by changing our consciousness. So here Krishna is trying to explain to Arjuna that he can engage his wrath on his enemies for Krishna's satisfaction. Now he's standing there in the battlefield, opposite side, his enemies are actually his relatives, his loved ones. But Krishna wants him to do his prescribed duty of a soldier as a warrior, to do his prescribed duty of fighting the war, but just changing the consciousness, working for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. Verse number 38. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. What beautiful analogies Krishna is giving. Just like the fire is covered up by smoke. In the beginning, we see a little bit of smoke coming. But then later on, when you fan it, then there is fire. So the fire is in there, but it's covered by smoke. Similarly, there is a mirror which is covered up by dust. So when it's covered up with dust, we really cannot see ourselves. Why? Because it's covered up. And the embryo by the womb. So there is that little baby inside, and then it's covered up by the womb. So similarly, Krishna says, we living entities, we are covered by different degrees of lust. Now it could be someone has only 10% degree, someone 50, someone 95%. It varies from person to person. But when the lust is there, that is covering up our real consciousness, then the purity is not seen. We need to remove all these coverings. We need to clean the dust from the mirror of the heart. And what is that dust? Lust, anger, greed, pride, envy, all these are the coverings on the mirror of the heart. So the question is, how do we remove that dust so that we can see our real selves, our real identity as the spirit soul? The simple process given in the Vedic scriptures is mantra meditation. When we chant the holy names of the Lord, the sound vibrations, they go into the ear and they go straight inside the heart and they start cleansing the heart. So here we can see Krishna is comparing lust to the smoke, and the fire of the living spark is pursued. But when we start purifying our consciousness, then it'll be like there will be clarity. So there will be then like you can understand that the fire is in full force. The cleansing of the dust of the mirror, as I explained, is mantra meditation. And the embryo inside the womb, just imagine to be, completely bent inside the womb, no place to move, no place to breathe, inside for 9 months. That is very painful, right? It's like a helpless position, just like you see the trees, they are standing, doesn't matter whether there is rain, snowfall, whatever it may be, they are in a helpless condition. So we as human beings, we can come out of that helpless condition. We can conquer that lust. It could be lust for anything. We can conquer it by becoming conscious of the Supreme Lord. That is the process. Verse number 39. We are almost towards the end of the chapter. Thus, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. So our pure consciousness, it gets covered up by lust and it's never satisfied. It burns like fire. And we have experienced that in our lives, that we have tried to acquire something. We had, we're lusty after something. I want this person, or I want this money, or I want this house, or it could be any kind of lust. And even after we've got it, there's no satisfaction as such. Why? Because the lust is still there in the body, in the heart, and it's burning like fire. So no amount of material things that can satisfy us. Why? Because we are not material beings, we are spiritual beings. So only spirituality is going to satisfy us. And if we somehow the other can control the lust, which is actually a symbol of ignorance, which means we take on knowledge and we defeat ignorance, we come to this platform of real spiritual knowledge and then change our consciousness. Now, verse number 40 is very interesting, like any other verse. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So now, Krishna has already told us who our enemy is. It is lust. So it's important to know, where is lust? Where is our enemy? If we do not know where the lust is, where is the sitting place, how will we conquer it? So he says it's the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. These are the three sitting places of lust. And our real knowledge is covered up by lust, and that is why there is bewilderment. So here Krishna is giving us a hint to locate the enemy. And once we locate the enemy, then we can conquer it. Similarly, when we are at war, the warriors, they need to locate where the enemy is so that they can defeat the enemy. So important thing to understand is that the mind is the center of activities and also the senses, because everything happens in the mind. The thinking, the willing, and the feeling, everything is in the mind. It all starts. So the center of activities is the mind, and the intelligence, it follows the mind, and then the mind follows the senses. But it's very important that the intelligence is fed with spiritual knowledge, so that intelligence can control the mind and the mind can control the senses. Verse number 41. Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bharatas, in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin or lust by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. See? Excuse me. So here, he's saying, in the very beginning, curb this sin by regulating the senses. Excuse me. I'm sorry, still recovering. So in the very beginning, curb this sin by regulating the senses. And Krishna is saying, slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. That means this lust is actually the destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. And how can we do that? As I already gave one simple example in the beginning of this class about eating. We eat every day. So why not eat sanctified food? Why not eat blessed food, something that is already blessed by the Lord? Offer what we eat to the Supreme Lord and then partake of that sanctified food. So that way, we will be able to control not only the mind, the senses, even the finer brain tissues get purified. So this is one of the ways that we can control the sense. And another way is, excuse me, another way is by mantra meditation. When we chant the holy names, we start purifying our senses also. And of course, as Krishna says, that if we do not curb it, then it destroys the path of self-realization. So Bhagavad Gita is giving us, in a very systematic way, the process of controlling the mind and the senses and purifying the consciousness also. Verse number 42. The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. So you see the hierarchy? So then there is sense objects, above is other senses, above is the mind, above is intelligence, above that is us, the spirit soul, and above us is the supreme soul, which is the supreme personality of Godhead. So if we can understand this, then we can see that the sense objects are right at the bottom and the Supreme Lord is right on the top. So we can somehow or the other start purifying the senses, the mind, the intelligence, and then come to the transcendental platform. You see what happens when there is lust within, then it's in the body and it gets vents out through the senses. See, we use the senses to vent out that those lusty desires. But if we become conscious of Krishna, then what happens? We come in direct connection with the Supreme Lord Krishna, and then the mind starts acting in that consciousness. You see, it's the mind that is active. Even when the body is not active, even when we are asleep, the mind is active. But if we engage our senses, our mind, everything, our body in spirituality, in devotional service, then what will happen? Then everything, there'll be regulation, and then everything will be engaged in the service to the Supreme Lord. So then mind and senses will also be engaged in devotional service, and then there will be no problem at all. Verse number 43. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, O mighty armed Arjuna, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence or Krishna consciousness, and thus, by spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. So here, this is the very last verse of this chapter number 3, where we have already understood that we are above the senses. We spirit soul are above senses, mind, and intelligence, right? So here Krishna is saying we need to steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence. He's not talking about blind faith. We can't do that in blindly. No, there has to be knowledge. There has to be understanding of that knowledge. So when we take on knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, we need to contemplate on it. Only when we contemplate on it that we will be really able to understand what is it that the Bhagavad Gita is talking about. So steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence. And simple process, which is there, which is already being followed for millions of years and has already proved to be successful, is mantra meditation. You see, there is a very nice verse, Sanskrit verse in the Vedas, which says krite yadhyayato Vishnu tretayam jajato makai. In Treta Yuga, in Satya Yuga, in Krita in Satya Yuga, there was a process of self-realization, which was meditation. And meditation, not just going to a class and closing our eyes and sitting down or falling asleep. No, not that kind of meditation. Meditation means, we will learn about that in detail in chapter 6 of Bhagavad Gita, which is the real way to perform meditation to get the benefit of self-realization. And that meditation is going to the forest, which means going to a place where there is no disturbance, there's no phone, nothing. We go to a secluded place, lay kusha grass, lay your skin on it, sit down with eyes half closed. That is very important. It is not that we, close our eyes completely, because that would, lead to falling asleep. So half closed eyes, which means we're still aware, and focus the vision to the tip of the nose, and then meditate on the Supreme Lord. That was the process. But to become self-realized, one has to meditate for thousands of years. We don't have that lifespan. In Treta Yuga, the process was fire sacrifice. In Dwapar Yuga, it was elaborate deity worship. But Kalau Tad Hari Kirtana. Tad means we get the same benefit of thousands of years of meditation, hundreds and hundreds of years of fire sacrifice, elaborate worship in the temple. We get the same benefit, Hari Kirtana, just by chanting the holy names of the Supreme Lord. And the Lord has given us the Maha Mantra. Mantra means one that frees the mind of all anxieties. And that Maha Mantra is Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So just by doing that meditation of chanting of these holy names, one will be able to steady the mind. So this was the last verse of this chapter 3 entitled Karma Yoga. And in this chapter 3, Krishna is talking about how we can become conscious of him, how to become Krishna conscious, how to understand who we really are, that we are the spirit soul and we are the servant of Krishna, and not get influenced by lust and different modes of material nature. No. We all want to engage our senses, but we need to engage them in the right direction, which means regulation is very, very important. So, as I mentioned, to control the mind and senses, mantra meditation is an integral part of spirituality. So let us do some meditation for a few minutes, and you can see, how it can make you happy and peaceful. We just chant the mantra, Maha Mantra, for just a few minutes to give you a taste, a higher taste for it. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Thank you so much for joining. If anyone has any questions or comments, you are very welcome to ask.